Hello, this is Crispin Flintoff. Please subscribe and get alerts for this channel because we are putting content out that is not seen elsewhere and people need to know about it. Thank you. We've got 7 speakers who are all going to speak about what is anti-Zionism. This follows Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi's appearance on the show last week when everyone put their hand up and wanted to join in, and I said we can't do it, we haven't got enough time. So I've brought everyone together, and we've got 3 minutes each for the speakers. I'm going to be very strict on that because we've only got a limited amount of time, and I'd really like it if all the speakers don't speak about anyone else who's spoken or refer to anyone else who's spoken by name. I don't want any kind of fighting. We've got to unite on this because as we've seen, they're all over us, so we need to be together. I thought to start this, we'd get Naomi to speak first because she started it, so to speak. Are you there, Naomi?
Yes, I take full responsibility. Sorry, Crispin. Yeah.
So I'm going to time 3 minutes for you to speak on what is anti-Zionism. Before you start, I mean, some of the issues are what is the anti-Zionist project and what are the aims of anti-Zionism? Obviously, you don't have to mention those particularly, but that's something that might be of interest. Okay, I'll over to you, Naomi.
Okay, so what are the aims of anti-Zionism? Palestinian liberation. Palestinian liberation depends on defeating Zionism. That means defeating racism. Not only is Zionism inescapably racist against Palestinians, it feeds off and requires the continuation of anti-Jewish racism, anti-Semitism. In the light of today's Israeli atrocities, Jews who've rejected their early Zionism can see that their youthful enthusiasm was based on lies. Zionists were always colonial settlers, even the well-meaning idealistic ones, and there were some. People can be nostalgic about it if they like, but Palestinians facing annihilation can't be expected to worry about such feelings. Our job is to fight for equality for Palestinians, and that requires what Naomi Klein has called an exodus, biblical reference there, from Zionism. It has corrupted Judaism, making it part of the structure of the Zionist movement. A religious faith that endorses Jewish supremacism is in big trouble. What's an anti-Zionist view of what Palestinians' future might look like? Not an oppressed minority in a Jewish supremacist state from the river to the sea, but also not an Islamist mirror image of it either. This movement is about freedom, justice, and equality for all. Right of return for Palestinian refugees. No more apartheid wall or apartheid laws. 1 state, 2 states, who knows? Fundamentally, though, Zionist domination has to end. There must be total equality, no one group in control. None of this means we have to tolerate people within our movement abusing one another, nor does it obviate the need for us to keep explaining the centuries of anti-Semitism which gave rise to Zionism. Know your enemy. It's counterproductive to get hung up on labeling people or demanding to know what label they will or will not adopt. We saw it with momentum inside Labour. Fighting over labels damages the movement that needs to unite around agreed goals. Right now, stop arming Israel tops the bill. I'll march with anyone who's striving for that goal. At the same time, it's an anti-racist movement, so we have to challenge any racism within it, including anti-Semitism. And that means explaining the origins of Zionism. If some people believe that JVL explaining Zionism makes us Zionist apologists, then they are entitled to their view. We will just carry on working with everyone who is acting in solidarity with Palestinians and against those on the right who manipulate racist impulses in the population to destroy the anti-fascist left and the solidarity movement. We have to face up to problems like with Stand Up to Racism by keeping up the pressure to foreground Palestine as integral to the anti-racist struggle. Palestinian speakers on anti-racist platforms. It's all about Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Now I'm moving on to Tony Greenstein. How are you doing, Tony?
I am fine, yes.
So UK for 3 minutes. We'll start whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Well, anti-Zionism is simply opposition to Zionism. So I'm going to really talk about what Zionism is, because then you can draw that conclusion. And the first thing is that people associate Zionism with being Jewish, but that is a real mistake, because Christian Zionism predated Jewish Zionism by about 4 centuries. It was a post-Reformation Enlightenment phenomena. And then in the 19th century, you had all these Christian imperialists, Lord Palmerston, Lord Shaftesbury, and then Disraeli, and then eventually Balfour, basically trying to persuade Jews that Zionism was a good thing. And in particular, Shaftesbury approached the Board of Deputies in 1840 for support for the idea of a Jewish state. And in 1842, the Board of Deputies issued a statement saying they wanted no part of it. And the reason is very simple. If you are a Zionist and if you support Zionism, you accept the idea that Jews do not belong in this country and that you are an alien, that therefore your real home, as Netanyahu and others have said, is in Israel, not in Britain. So that is why, that is the basis of the agreement between anti-Semites and Zionists. Both agree, I mean, on the same thing. So if someone tells me in a bar, the usual drunken bore, that I should go to Israel, they're either a Zionist or an anti-Semite, or both of them. Now, I want to come on briefly to the whole question of anti-Semitism itself. Zionism was originally a reaction to anti-Semitism, but the worst form of reaction, because it accepted what the anti-Semites said. Today, that is not true. Zionism is the ideology of settler colonialism. Zionism is, if you like, Jewish racial supremacy. And it's important to understand that. And many people excuse what Israel does or what the Zionist movement does because they say that Jews suffer from a Holocaust trauma. I don't accept that. Israel's reaction to October the 7th was not Holocaust trauma, it was settler colonial trauma. It was the same trauma that slaveholders experienced when the black slaves revolted, because they feared that what they'd done to the slaves might be done to them. And that's similar in Israel. The fear that the Palestinians might return in kind what has happened to them is ever present in Israel, but it's dressed up as Holocaust trauma because that makes it much more powerful. And of course,
your time's run over nearly, but go on. You've got, yeah, carry on.
Of course, the hypocrisy of the West, and the German state in particular, in using the Holocaust to justify what Israel has done, requires a certain amnesia, because all the Western states during the Holocaust behaved towards the Jewish refugees in exactly the same way as they behave towards refugees today. And the Daily Mail ran a campaign against bogus Jewish refugees from Germany. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Next speaker is Sam Weinstein of IGEN. How are you doing, Sam?
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll let you get going. 3 minutes on
all right.
What is anti-Zionism?
We in the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network are from a very different Jewish tradition than the Zionists. We are from the tradition of Marak Edelman, one of the commanders of the Jewish uprising and resistance against the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto. Edelman said, "To be a Jew is always to be with the oppressed, never with the oppressor." It is also the tradition of Karl Marx, Rosa Luxemburg, Emma Goldman, Leon Trotsky, and a long line of social justice activists and trade union leaders. like my grandfather, Paul Deitch, a truck driver from Poland who helped found his Teamster local union in New York City and fought mafia corruption in the union. And my mother, Selma James, who at 94 goes on all the Palestinian marches here in London, is an internationally known founder of the Wages for Housework campaign, fighting for mothers and all carers. For me, anti-Zionism is Ijan's protest outside the Swiss Cottage Library between 5 and 6 on Fridays, calling for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, Hotavelli, who was happy to contemplate the deaths of 600,000 Palestinians in Gaza and the leveling of every building. It is Palestine Action doing what it can to disrupt Elbit, the Israeli arms manufacturer, and of course led by Huda, who you just heard from. It is millions of people all over the world in the streets protesting the genocide in Gaza and demanding the right of return and self-determination for Palestinians. It is exposing the fact that Tommy Robinson's English Defense League had a Jewish section led by a Zionist, perhaps in the Zionist tradition that made a deal with Hitler to take German goods to Palestine, save a few wealthy Jews, and break an international Jewish-led boycott of Germany in 1933 that almost brought the Reich down. It is shutting down freeways surrounding Parliament and the White House and occupying train stations in support of Palestine. It is South Africa, a victor over apartheid, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide and labeling as reproductive genocide the continuing murder of infants, children, and women. It is exposing those who would divide the movement like Stand Up to Racism, which voted to allow Zionist and Israeli flags on its marches. One Ijan slogan is, "You cannot be anti-racist if you are not anti-Zionist." Okay. Israel is now the leading edge of an international right-wing surge in government. Like Trump in the US, Orban in Hungary, or Meloni in Italy. One large piece of the antidote to these fascists is anti-Zionism, and we intend to amplify those anti-Zionist voices in every way we can. Thank you, Clintoff.
No worries, Sam. Thank you very much. Good. Now I'm going to move on to David Miller. Good to see you on here, David.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. Are you okay to go with the 3 minutes?
I guess so. Is that me then?
Yeah, well, yeah, whenever you're ready, yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about anti-Zionism in the sense of what the strategy of the movement is and ought to be. And I want to talk about what I would call a maximalist anti-Zionism. Zionism is a maximalist and indeed eliminationist philosophy. And we need to meet Zionism with a maximalist anti-Zionism, which means that we don't just say that we want to abolish Zionism, that we talk about how we would do that materially. And to do that materially, I think we need to think about taking deliberate anti-Zionist actions. And I think Sam has given I know I'm not supposed to talk about the people, but Sam has given a great account of what that means, material anti-Zionism. And of course, Huda is the leading exponent of the cutting edge of anti-Zionism, maximalist anti-Zionism in this country, I would say. The difficulty is that there's a contending argument which says we need a broad movement, comrades. We need to have as many people on the marches as possible. It's the marches which will change things. And I think that of course, the marches are important. Of course, they perform all sorts of ideological functions in terms of movement building. But the marches are not the only thing which will change things. And that's why we need to have material actions to actually shut down arms factories and indeed to close down Zionist organizations in this country and elsewhere. I think there's a mistake which is often made, which is that the idea that there are some nice or well-meaning Zionists who have been misled or they're naive. And I think there was that argument was possible in 1942 when the Biltmore Conference in New York decided that there would be a Jewish state, and there was a minority position in the movement which said that they shouldn't have a Jewish state, and that minority position was associated with the left. And that minority position lasted until 1945, at which point, after that point, the left who had voted against a Jewish state joined the Palmach, in fact, founded the Palmach, and engaged in the Nakba. There is no excuse after 1945 to believe that there was a possibility of some kind of progressive Zionism. And if you read Tony Cliff, the founding theoretician of the Socialist Workers' Party, which gives us the IS tradition, which gives us stand up to racism today, if you read him in 1946, he is coruscating about socialist Zionism. And in fact, I would say, if you read the Tony Cliff carefully from 1946 today, you would see that the things that he says in 1946 about socialist Zionism and left Zionism would have him expelled from the modern day Socialist Workers' Party. And I think that's the difficulty, is that the anti-racist movement in this country, from the very beginning in the post-1945 period, has accommodated Zionism. And it might have been anti-Zionist. The Socialist Workers' Party, as I understand it, remains an anti-Zionist party, but they have accommodated Zionism within the movement. The Anti-Nazi League, Rock Against Racism, Unite Against Fascism, Stand Up to Racism is the other example. And we see, of course, that the poverty of that approach with stand up to racism. Now, the difficulty with encouraging Zionists to be part of your movement is that there is always a price. There's always a price. And the price, of course, is that you shouldn't mention the Z word, or you shouldn't say the Z word too much, and you shouldn't focus too much on Zionism or the Zionist movement, or closing down Zionism, or dismantling the Zionist entity. You shouldn't do that. You should also, of course, not mention Islamophobia too much. In fact, sometimes you find people on the left even using racist terms like Islamist or Islamism to describe the Palestinian resistance. And I think that's an indication of the weakness of some elements of the left. They incorporate those kinds of ideas, Islamophobic ideas, and it doesn't just run to Zionists on the left. Sometimes anti-Zionists come out with such terms as well. And I think that's a problematic issue. And in the end, the price is too much. We're well past the time when we have to accommodate Zionists and think of their feelings. Their feelings aren't important. There's a genocide.
Okay, thank you, David. And now we're moving on to Sabby Sagall, who's written obviously about Zionism and is regular on the show. How are you doing, Sabby?
Yes, okay, thanks, Chris.
Okay, for 3 minutes.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'll be as succinct as I can. Yes, my main argument is that Zionism, support for a Jewish state in Israel in the Middle East, is actually an aberration from the real Jewish historical tradition. Zionists like to argue that, you know, the Romans kicked out the Jews in the year of the Common Era, 70, and the Jews have, you know, they were expelled into the diaspora and have hankered ever since to return to Israel. This is far from the historical reality. In fact, all the recent historical research indicates that even at the time of the Roman conquest of ancient Palestine, a majority of Jews lived outside the territory because they were traders, they were mercantilists, traveling because ancient Palestine was at the crossroads of caravan routes, so they developed this mercantile approach to life, this mercantile mentality. So they were traveling. They traveled in North Africa, in Egypt, then up into Spain, eventually into Western Europe. And what they represented, these Jewish traders, they represented early capitalists, if you like. They were traders in a pre-capitalist era. So whenever capitalism developed, for example, in Europe in the 17th century, Jews moved further and further east to the less developed societies, to the less developed economies where capitalism had not just developed and where they therefore still had an economic function, a function of exchange, of being traders. So by the end of the 19th century, the majority of Jews lived in Poland and Russia. However, you know, once you get industrial capitalism developing in Russia in the late 19th century, Jews lost their trader, their exchange function. And that's when you get the beginnings of modern anti-Semitism. Modern anti-Semitism, I would argue, is essentially an economic function. It's the racism of competitors to the Jewish traders. So from this point of view, Jews also developed an internationalist outlook. And if you read the late Isaac Deutscher's great essay, The Non-Jewish Jew, of 1958, the classic essay, you know, he shows that actually Jews are internationalists. in terms of their ethnic identity. They are not nationalists, and therefore, if you look at before the Second World War, Zionism was a movement supported by a small minority of Jews, and in Jewish municipal elections in Warsaw, for example, in 1936, Zionists polled 22% of the vote, compared to 30% for the Anti-Zionist Bund, which was a Jewish socialist trade.
Time's running up. Sorry, running out a bit.
Yeah. So just finally, when Theodor Herzl sent, the founder of political Zionism, sent an assistant to Palestine in the 19th century to explore the territory, and the man came back and said, yes, the bride is beautiful, but she's married to another man. In other words, as Palestine was a territory already inhabited by a large indigenous population, and that the Jews, in other words, settlers in Palestine, would face a massive problem, and that's the heart. Zionism is really an aberration from the real Jewish historical tradition, and Zionism would never have succeeded if not for the fact that Israel is an important asset in the strategy of Western imperialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabby. Now, moving on to Tony Booth from JVL. How you doing, Tony? Unmuting you. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Yep, great.
Are you okay to speak now?
Yep,
Okay.
it's fine.
All right.
Thanks. Okay, I think we're all talking here to try to further peace and liberation for Palestinians. We're not engaged in the anti-Zionist Olympics with a gold medal for the purest formulation after we nudge off the track those who are not as clear thinking as ourselves. Two people who self-describe as Zionist may have very different ideas of what Zionism means. That's incontrovertible. But I don't think it's a good idea for anyone to self-describe as Zionist because of the word's links to the settler, colonial, imperialist, Zionist project of land grabs, dispossession, ethnic cleansing, racism, apartheid, and genocide. But suppose a Jew says that he or she thinks that the future of Israel-Palestine should be a single secular, demilitarized, democratic state, which includes all the people between the river and the sea. And then such a person says, that's what I mean by my Zionism. This would involve the dismantling of the Jewish supremacist Israeli state, but it continues an element of a Zionist project since Jews who migrated to the region would remain there. But it also involves elements of what many say is the anti-Zionist project. I give this same meaning to From the River to the Sea, Palestine will be free. I know that if it did happen, by some astounding shifts of power and culture, it would involve incredible generosity and forgiveness on behalf of the dispossessed and otherwise oppressed Palestinians. Yet, during the worst times of the Northern Ireland conflict, I thought that the solution might need to involve the shift of implacable loyalists back to the mainland to make way for a peaceful transition to a united Ireland. We do not all mean the same by the anti-Zionist project. To be anti-Zionist, though, is to be pro-Palestinian, to be concerned with the interests of Palestinians, with Palestinian self-determination, understood through the variety of Palestinian perspectives. And what are the biggest threats to the future of Palestinians? Mazin Kimsia, Palestinian activist and environmentalist, reminds us of the huge threat to Palestinians from climate collapse and environmental destruction, even while genocide is raging in Gaza and the West Bank. It's the oppressed, the poor, the vulnerable across the world who are the majority victims of global environmental collapse. The anti-Zionist projects must address the environmental degradation of the occupation, and like any project of the left, also the planetary catastrophes from the capitalist destruction of life on earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Everyone's been pretty good on the timing. The last speaker is Jackie Walker, who's going to round it off with a flourish. No pressure on you, Jackie.
No pressure at all. Well, first of all, I'm just going to dispose about these discussions about this kind of Zionism and that kind of Zionism. I'm not interested, and particularly at the moment, it's a diversion, because we know what mainstream Zionism is. And we know that it was mainstream Zionism that founded the Jewish state. And herein lies the original fault line in Zionism and the Israel project. Because with the creation of Israel in 1948, Zionism became totally linked with the state of Israel. It was also, of course, centrally linked with an alliance with Western, and at the time, especially British imperialism. Of course, more recently, that alliance has been adopted chiefly by the US. Now, it's like a piece of political archaeology, Israelis. Settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing has actually been what has powered Euro-American domination of the world. But it happened, 100 or 200 or 300 years ago, and we didn't see it. And of course, the morals were different. But what we see now, laid bare for us, red in tooth and claw, whether it's in the commentary of our political and media class, or in the eviscerated and tortured bodies in Gaza and the West Bank, is the actual entrails, the working of Euro-American power. And it's laid bare for us all to see, and we're horrified. But this is what is happening all around the world, all the time, by Euro-American imperialism and capitalism. Now, the establishment of a Jewish state was, from the beginning, always based on the ethnic cleansing, and it was maintained and still maintained by brute force, and given the cover that it has some high moral purpose through its pairing with the Holocaust and the stories of the Holocaust. For me, no platforming Zionist is almost always inappropriate, but there are limits to this. We cannot accept joining with marches and movements where we see the Israeli flag, the flag of genocide, waved. That's unacceptable. I will not march with Zionists. I will not march with their flags. So for me, organizations like Hope Not Hate are totally unacceptable. That, to me, is a step too far. I will not acknowledge them. Whatever else we need to do, we need to reiterate that Zionism is a form of racism. It has its own particular characteristics, like every form of racism does, but that's what it is. And we need to consider how Zionism fits into other forms of racism. What my experience as an anti-racist trainer has told me is that we have to have both rigid lines where we do not cross, and we also have to be flexible in how we challenge them. But our role as anti-Zionists is no different than our role as socialists, in that we should challenge any state that declares itself as created for one people alone, whether that is Jewish, Christian, Islamic, Black, or white. It's simple. As socialists, as people who are humanists, every person counts.